Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. He stops at the house of two friends, two sisters, Martha and Mary, the sisters of Lazarus that we meet in the Gospel of John. And Martha comes out of the house to greet him. Mary, her sister, sits at his feet and stays there listening to his words. Martha then becomes distracted by her many tasks. She comes to Jesus and she says, "Lord, don't you see that I'm doing all the work by myself? Tell my sister to give me a hand." And Jesus responds, "Martha, Martha, you are fussing and fretting about so many things, but only one thing is necessary. Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken away from her." This story has been used down the centuries to describe the difference between contemplation and action. Martha is seen as the active person, and Mary the contemplative. And clearly they are two different personality types. We see that from the beginning of the story, where Martha comes out of the house. She's the proactive one. She's the organizer. She's the person who likes to make sure that everyone is registered and has paid their money. Mary sits at the Lord's feet and just listens. She's more introverted. She doesn't need to be in the limelight, but she's listening to his words. The criticism of Martha in the gospel story is simply that she becomes distracted by her many tasks. She's a multitasker. She can do many things at once. But maybe things have broken down for her in the kitchen. The microwave doesn't work, or the food that she wanted isn't there. And she becomes distracted, and she becomes anxious and angry. She comes back into the room where Jesus is, and she attacks Jesus. She's a kind of domestic terrorist. She now tells him what to do. I think this is the only story in the gospel where one of the disciples tells Jesus what to do. "Tell my sister to give me a hand." And she's exhibiting all the classic symptoms of stress. She's isolated, she feels lonely, she feels overwhelmed, she can't cope, and she's angry, and she's displacing her anger onto innocent bystanders. And we should remember she's suffering. Stress is a very characteristic part of life today, and it causes great stress. We know that it causes physical diseases. It means we have to take time off work. It may interrupt our career. It may disrupt our family life. Stress is a disease of the modern world. And if we were to give Martha one more job to do in heaven, it would be, I think, to become the patron saint of stress, because she's exhibiting a classic example of it. Because she's suffering, we see Jesus responding not with anger, not with condemnation, but with compassion. And first of all, he says, "Martha, Martha." In other words, he's recalling her to herself. She's lost touch with herself. That's what's happened when we fall into stress and into anxiety. We feel cut off from our own true identity, and therefore we can't relate to other people, certainly not to the Spirit. So the first thing he does is simply to recall her to herself. And then, like a good friend, he puts a mirror in front of her. He leads her to self-knowledge. He says, "You are fussing and fretting about so many things. You're scattered, you're fragmented, you're doing too much, and you've lost your center, you've lost your sense of priority." And then he defends Mary in a way that has been used down the centuries to defend the contemplative life from those who say that it's a waste of time, it's useless. The time you spend meditating doesn't do any good. He says Mary has chosen the better part, and it will not be taken away from her. He says that only one thing is necessary. What is the one thing necessary? He doesn't define it, actually. It's up to us to interpret this story. And perhaps the one thing necessary is to realize that Martha and Mary are not just two personality types, the introvert and the extrovert, in conflict. but that they are the two aspects of the human soul. In you, in me, in everyone, there are these two dimensions, like the two halves of the brain, the intuitive and the logical, the active, the contemplative. And that the happy house, the friendly self, the true self, is when these two aspects of our identity are in harmony and integrated. The power of Jesus' comments to Martha is to recall her to that deep inner wisdom, to put herself back into harmony with her other half, the other half of herself. How do we do that? How do we put ourselves back into a harmony where the active and the contemplative sides of our lives are operating, running together, so that we do our work not like Martha in a stressful, angry and disrupted way, but we do it joyfully, we do it peacefully, we do it productively. Surely it's by realizing that Mary is also working. It's a quieter work, not so obvious, doesn't catch the headlines, but Mary is also working because she is sitting still. She's listening to the words of the Lord. And her work is actually the basis of the good work that Martha should be doing. The one thing necessary to put these two sides together, but also to realize, as Jesus says, that Mary has chosen the better part. This isn't a put down to Martha. It's reminding her that being comes before doing. And that if we lose touch with the essential harmony, the essential peace and goodness of our own being, then our work, our activity, our daily lives will begin to fall apart. How do we put this back together? How do we recover this friendship within ourselves? Well, I remember telling the story once at a Buddhist Christian conference I was speaking at, and a Buddhist friend of mine said, that's a really good story, I can relate to that. What happened next? And of course we don't know, as in many of the gospel stories we'll be looking at, we don't know what happens next. Because in a sense, what happens next is us. How do we interpret it? How do we find a practical way, a way like daily meditation, to put this priority back into our lives, to see how our lives of action, our running around, our work, are built upon the stillness, the silence, the listening, which is the work of Mary.